Hello, comrades. Some time ago, a certain Trotskyist posted a series of comments on my videos on my Marxist-Leninist theory channel. To be exact, this Trotskyist posted these comments on videos of Marxist classics about dialectical materialism, such as Engels' Dialectics of Nature and Stalin's Dialectical and Historical Materialism. They said the following about Engels' Dialectics of Nature. This is surely one of the worst books ever written by a Marxist, rivaled perhaps only by Anti-Dühring, which is another major classic, Lenin's Materialism and Imperial Criticism, which is another huge classic, and philosophical notebooks, Stalin's Dialectical and Historical Materialism. So this person basically attacks not only Engels but also Stalin and Lenin, and this is what they said about Mao's examples of dialectics. Quote, I have demolished this dogmatic theory from a Marxist angle at my site. For one thing, I have to admit our Trotskyists certainly seems to think highly of themselves. So according to them, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin and Mao were all just completely wrong, and our Trotskyist has quote unquote demolished their quote unquote dogmatic theories. Gotta really admire the modesty here. So after a brief glance at the website, and indeed our Trotskyite has an entire website devoted to this, I decided I simply must respond and make a rebuttal of this Trotskyite revisionist attack against Marxism. That said, the site has a lot of content and I don't have the patience or the time to nitpick my way through all of that, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be worth it. So I'm going to focus on the main points presented in one particular text, Anti-Dialectics for Beginners, or Why I Oppose Dialectical Materialism, which seems to be intended as a summary of the main arguments. And I'm also going to select a couple of the other arguments. The site sort of, it's not really easy to go through in order, if you will, because all the texts are basically full of links, which it's like, this is what I said, here, and go here to see this and go here to see that, and then they all link back to each other. But mostly I'm gonna focus on this one thing, but it branches out into different directions, so I'm gonna take something out of those as well. So the first argument against Marxist dialectics is really not an argument against it at all, but it's a defense of formal logic. They state that formal logic can handle change, despite the fact that it's generally perceived as dealing with static objects which exist in a vacuum and not with real things. Their argument is that firstly that mathematics, which according to Engels is compatible with dialectics, uses variables, and secondly formal logic uses variables. That is, it basically employs letters to stand for propositions, objects, processes and the like, all of which can and do change. The thing is that that's not exactly accurate. Formal logic is not the same as mathematics, and I have to admit that I'm not an expert on dialectics, nor an expert on math or physics or formal logic, but since the article is titled Anti-Dialectics for Beginners, you'd think I wouldn't have to be. They don't even attempt to explain how formal logic deals with change, actually. And I, for one, can't figure it out, and apparently I'm not alone on this. I guess our Trotskyite revisionist has some brilliant theory about this, which is just beyond the minds of us mere mortals, but it would help if they would elaborate at least a little bit. I mean, let's be fair, it's supposed to be for beginners, so at least give us an example. All I could gather from this is that, they say, math uses variables, and Engels says math is okay, therefore formal logic, which also uses variables, must be okay. That's which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because simply because it uses variables doesn't mean that it's the same thing. But I saw this same person comment on another YouTube video about this topic, where they argued that modern temporal logic, for example, copes with change rather well. That's what they said. So judging from this talk about math and temporal logic, I think this person misunderstands what people mean when they say formal logic can't handle change. It's not that some change cannot be represented in terms of formal logic. For example, you can use time as a variable and then say, for example, now A is X and after 1 hour A is Y, or something like that. However, that doesn't change the fact that this is all purely theoretical, that these are only static objects that have no connection to reality, whereas things in the real world are interconnected and being affected by each other, changing and creating change elsewhere, almost as if they were in a dialectical relationship. What do you know? That said, even if the claims of these Trotskyites were true, and I don't think they are, it still wouldn't even be an argument against dialectics, because it's only a defense of formal logic. So the second criticism is titled "Motion isn't a contradiction." So our Trotskyite says, according to Hegel, motion is contradictory. Unfortunately, dialecticians have bought into this rather odd idea, almost as if they were singing from the same hymn sheet. They all tend to argue alongside Engels as follows. As soon as we consider things in their motion, their change, their life, their reciprocal influence on one another, then we immediately become involved in contradictions. Motion itself is a contradiction. Even simple mechanical change of place can only come about through a body at one and the same moment of time being both in one place and in another place, being in one and the same place and also not in it. And the continuous assertion and simultaneous solution of this contradiction is precisely what motion is. This is an age-old confusion derived from a paradox invented by an ancient Greek mystic called Zeno. So basically, this paradox is that an arrow is shot and flies through the air. The time in which arrow's movement exists can be split into instantaneous moments. In each of these moments, the arrow is of course motionless, and if the arrow is motionless in every moment, which combined forms the time of its flight, then movement is impossible. In other words, since it only occupies a single space at any given moment, it cannot move. Our Trotskyite here brings up this paradox and roughly explains it, but doesn't really deal with it in any way. It just points out, oh, this is a paradox and blah blah blah. Therefore, something. And they further state that one comrade has recently sought to challenge me on this. The details can be found here, and then there's a link. In fact, I have shown that Hegel/Engels' idea about motion lead to even more ridiculous conclusions than this. End of quote. The interesting thing here is that the comments exchange that is cited doesn't actually fare too favorably for the Trotskyite here. The person challenging them gives a completely sufficient refutation of their arguments, to which they don't respond with anything, and instead just gloat here to have demonstrated how this theory apparently leads to quote-unquote even more ridiculous conclusions. So the refutation that the person challenging our Trotskyite's views is based on physics and is the following. I also gotta love the fact that it's the explanation that by these Trotskyites, they're so vague that it's like multiple times it seems like they're just saying, oh, this is a contradiction, therefore it's wrong, even though of course it's a contradiction. That's the whole point. But anyway, let's move on. So the refutation given by this person is it's based on physics, and it's the following. When a body is in motion, its velocity is not zero, and therefore velocity is the derivative of distance divided by the derivative of time, which cannot be zero, or which is something else than zero. Also say that what we're discussing are fundamental facts of physics, which you have to understand prior to attempting to understand philosophical theories involving them. During motion, the position of a body in physical terms is defined by x, distance, and yet it's not defined by x, but is defined by a derivative of x. When in motion, a body is at one point x, and yet it is at 2 points whose difference is derivative of x. The same applies to time. You can define the body in motion at time t, and yet there is a difference of two times derivative of t, which also characterizes temporally a body in motion. These are obviously contradictory conditions of motion coexisting. Motion is a constant resolution of these contradictions. That is what physics says. And the Trotskyite counter-argument here seems to be like, this is silly. Like, that's not an argument. I mean, yeah, physics is kind of funny sometimes. That's not an argument. The rest of their counter-arguments are just silly. Instead of contesting the fact that things in motion exist in multiple places at the same time, they turn around and argue that really all physical bodies exist in multiple places because, for example, beans exist inside a tin and inside a store, or your head and your feet exist in different places despite being your body. However, this is simply wordplay. The point they're making is that things don't exist in a single point, but in an area, but that has no impact on the argument whatsoever, and Engels nor anyone that the Trotskyite here is arguing against has ever claimed that humans, beans, or tin cans exist in a single point. It's obvious that wasn't what Engels was arguing. Besides, this kind of talk is metaphysical, and then they proceed to say that, this is a mistake by Engels because this kind of idea also applies to things that are not in motion, for example, beans in tin cans. But as I just pointed out, that's not what Engels is talking about at all, because, yeah, you get the point. It's just word games to say, beans exist inside a tin can, inside a warehouse. That's obviously it's not the same location. It's not the same point. Existing inside a tin can and also inside a factory or warehouse or whatever doesn't mean that they exist in two different points. Our Trotskyite claims to agree with and follow historical materialism, since it's the Marxist understanding of history, which is the analysis of history using materialist dialectics. This cannot be. They don't even seem to understand even the historical materialism they claim to follow. Although I am highly critical of dialectical materialism, nothing said here or in the other essays posted at this site is aimed at undermining historical materialism, a theory I fully accept, or for that matter, revolutionary socialism. Oh yeah, of course it's not meant to undermine those at all. Even though you call Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, you just call them dogmatist idiots, but of course that's not meant to undermine them at all. My aim is simply to assist in the scientific development of Marxism by demolishing a dogma, like, oh yeah, of course, I mean, I'm sure you're just improving Marxism so much here by demolishing this dogma by these fools, Marx and Engels. That has, in my opinion, seriously damaged our movement from its inception. Well, thank God. Marx and Engels have just been so damaging to the movement. I'm so glad our Trotskyite here has come to save us. So historical materialism means the application of dialectical materialism to the study of history and society. So therefore it's pretty hard for me to understand how one can oppose dialectics and yet support a method based on dialectics. But our Trotskyite explains. It could be objected that the distinction between DM and HM, or dialectical materialism and historical materialism, drawn at this site is completely spurious, hence the claims made in this essay are hopelessly misguided. Yeah, well, it could be, certainly. However, as will be argued in essay 14 part 2, like, this is what I'm talking about. There's no way I'm gonna go through all that. I'm not gonna go through essay 1 through 14, especially if they're multi-part essays or whatever. Historical materialism contains ideas that are nonsensical only when they are expressed in dialectical materialist jargon. The eminent good sense made by historical materialism, even as it is perceived by workers when they encounter it, often in times of struggle, testifies to this fact. So this is like a long-running theme on this website. Our Trotskyite claims that basically dialectics means only using overtly difficult and confusing language. So it's not because the issues that we're talking about are actually difficult. It's because it's just, overtly difficult jargon, and I do not really, it's pretty difficult for me to comprehend this. Historical materialism is using dialectics in the understanding of history. It seems to me that they're suggesting that it's not dialectical, so they can't think that it's actually using dialectics to understand history. It has to be something else, but they're still saying that all that dialectics is, it's just historical materialism with jargon. So, I don't know. But anyway, this claim that it's just difficult language for the sake of difficult language is just a huge straw man argument. But they proceed to explain it a little bit further, so let's give them a chance. The clear distinction between these two theories isn't just a wild idea advanced at this site. Well, I haven't heard it before, but it can be seen in the day-to-day practice of revolutionaries. No Marxist of any intelligence would use slogans drawn exclusively from DM to communicate with workers. Consider, for example, the following slogans. The law of identity is true only within certain limits, and the struggle against occupation of Afghanistan. Or, change in quantity leads to change in quality, and the defense of pensions. Slogans like these would be employed by militants of uncommon stupidity and legendary ineffectiveness. So when Trotskyites lack a valid argument, which is most of the time, they resort to idiotic nonsense like this. Basically, they're just making a joke here. Their whole argument is basically a joke. Literally. Primitive communism will negate itself and turn into private property, which in turn will be negated and give way to modern scientific communism. This is what's called the negation of the negation, which is one of the laws of the materialist dialectics. And this law can be and has been used by communists countless times. So it's not just difficult jargon. You don't have to make it difficult. Engels actually explains things fairly clearly, like even though the terminology is difficult because it's Hegelian terminology. It's not that Engels invented these terms. Hegel is really difficult to understand, and Engels is using the terms that Hegel used. But unlike Hegel, he actually gives examples and things which makes it easier to understand. And Stalin explains things even more simplified and clearly, and with more examples. And for some reason, this Trotskyite seems to have even a bigger problem with that. Anyway, development is the struggle of opposites, Lenin said, which is based on this law, negation of the negation. The opposites in this case would be the capitalist and proletarian classes, and the two systems, capitalist and socialist systems. The law of the passage of quantitative changes into qualitative changes is also a cornerstone of the Marxist understanding of revolution and its tactics, and not merely just some kind of useless throwing around of difficult words. Stalin explains, if the passing of slow quantitative changes into rapid and abrupt qualitative changes is a law of development, then it is clear that revolutions made by oppressed classes are a quite natural and inevitable phenomenon. Hence, the transition from capitalism to socialism and the liberation of the working class from the yoke of capitalism cannot be effected by slow changes, by reforms, but only by qualitative change of the capitalist system by revolution. Indeed, revolution is a perfect example of this. Quantitative increase in the proletarian class consciousness and escalation of the class struggle leads to a qualitative leap, a social revolution leading from private property to its opposite, and it's not a slow reformist transition to some hybrid between the two, although some third-way revisionists would like you to believe otherwise. There really are only two options: there's capitalism or socialism, private property or not private property. Even state capitalism is still capitalism, even so-called mixed economy or social democracy is still capitalism. But anyway, this brings us to the last of the three laws of dialectics that Engels defined, which is the unity and conflict of opposites. That is, that without two opposing classes there couldn't be a class system, which through the resolution of this contradiction between the classes turns into its opposite, the system without classes. All of these ideas are core principles of Marxism-Leninism and used in historical materialist theory and analysis without any kind of unnecessary quote-unquote dialectical jargon, like our Trotskyist revisionist calls it. So let's go over some other criticisms that our Trotskyite has to say about these three basic laws. Quote, "This weak and superficial endeavor to substantiate Engels' laws resembles creationist attempts to show that the Book of Genesis is scientific." Now that's of course like incredibly insulting, calling Marxism basically just, a religion and completely unscientific. But anyway, here is the first law, the alleged change of quantity into quality. So apparently our Trotskyite doesn't even believe in change of quantity into quality, which is surprising. Maybe I'm being too optimistic here. But then there's a quote from Hegel. "But a transition from quality into quantity, and vice versa, becoming other, which is an interruption of gradualness and the production of something qualitatively different from the reality which preceded it. Water in cooling does not gradually harden as if it thickened like porridge, gradually solidifying until it reaches the consistency of ice. It suddenly solidifies all at once. It can remain quite fluid even at freezing point if it is standing undisturbed, and then a slight shock will bring it into the solid state." Then there's an Engels quote. "The transformation of quantity into quality and vice versa. For our purpose, we could express this by saying that in nature, in a manner exactly fixed for each individual case, qualitative changes can only occur by the quantitative addition or subtraction of matter or motion, so-called energy. Hence, it is impossible to alter the quality of a body without addition or subtraction of matter or motion, i.e. without quantitative alteration of the body concerned." And our Trotskyite, "But how could he possibly know it is impossible to change the quality of a body without the addition of matter or energy? In fact, he couldn't possibly know this." So does water boil without the addition of energy, that is heat? Does it freeze without the removal of energy, i.e. heat? No, it doesn't. And if it did, it would be magic. Do chemical elements change into other elements without addition or removal of protons or other particles? No, they don't. Does a strategic stalemate turn into a victory without an increase in one's own power or the decrease in the enemy's power? No, obviously not. Does a socialist revolution happen without an increase in the political consciousness and activity of the masses? Of course it doesn't. In general, objects in nature don't simply change without energy being introduced or taken away. I don't understand how that would happen. The Trotskyite here doesn't explain it. They just say that Engels somehow is wrong here. But the Trotskyite continues, this time again resorting to nitpicking, sophistry, and distorting what Engels is really saying. Moreover, and contrary to what he asserted, not everything in nature changes in the way he says in sudden quote-unquote leaps. Considering melting glass, rock, resin, metal, butter, toffee, and plastic. When heated, these change from solid to liquid slowly with no quote-unquote nodal points anywhere in sight. Who doesn't know that metals soften and then melt gradually? Okay, so this is a huge confusion of ideas when it comes to quantity and quality. That is, the fact that metal may melt gradually does not mean that there is no qualitative change. And there's a lot of really playing around with the term rapid here. So saying it has to be rapid is semantics, but besides, you'd have to define what rapid and gradual are for this to make sense. I don't understand why is this rapidity aspect so important that they focus so much on that. I don't really understand, but anyway, let's roll with it. So even let's assume that they're perfectly correct. Of course it's gradual. Let's say it's gradual. How does that affect the theory at all? It's still correct, but I'm not saying that it is actually gradual. So let's explore this further. So every material has its melting point. There is a temperature where it begins to not only get warm but to melt into liquid. And I also think these examples are quite strange. Like if you ask me, glass and butter, they melt very quickly actually. But this is again a question of how you define rapid. You would really need to explain what rapid means if you think that butter doesn't rapidly melt. If you think it melts slowly. Metals do melt very rapidly according to science if they have reached their melting point, and prior to that they don't melt at all. So what's the how I don't understand how they can claim they do. So the melting point is actually not a single point. It's a very narrow range called the melting range, which is the range between the point when a metal begins to melt and then the point when all its crystals are liquid. But this range is very narrow and typically only 1 or 2 degrees. So is that rapid enough for you, Trotskyist? You could, of course, heat a piece of iron for hours, making it seem like it melts very slowly. But really, it's not about the time that it takes to heat it, it's about the heat, as I'm sure everyone with a functioning brain should realize. So, yeah, huge confusion of ideas and terms here. So, metal softening is also not a qualitative, but a quantitative change. But their whole argument pretty much relies on the fact that metal softening is considered a qualitative change, which it isn't. So Trotsky says, all metals go from hard to soft very slowly. So whatever you say, but we're talking about melting. Metal is solid if it's not liquid. I don't understand how it's so difficult to understand. So the qualitative transition of metals from solid to liquid is slow, not rapid. At the melting point, the transition ends, but the lead up to it is slow. So again, this is pure confused sophistry. Like, the quantitative increases in heat is gradual, and the qualitative leap from solid to liquid is rapid. How is that difficult to understand? Science recognizes that metals have a melting point, and that there is a solid and a liquid metal, not a half liquid, half solid metal, or like 10% solid, 90% liquid metal, or anything like that. Like, one might as well say that the build-up towards socialism is gradual, and then the revolution is merely the end point of the transition. Therefore, it's reformism or something. Gradual reformism. Solid metal, even if it's warm, it's still qualitatively different from liquid metal, just like capitalism, even if on the brink of collapse, is still qualitatively different from socialism, even if only just emerging from civil war. So no matter how you word the transformation process, you can say whatever you want, but that doesn't change the way it is. And really, this is the kind of sophistry that could be used to argue that when you die, no sudden qualitative changes really happen. It's just you could use that to argue about anything. It's nonsense. So this demonstrates a very serious and complete lack of understanding of quantity versus quality. When you cross the threshold of solid to liquid, that is when the qualitative change has happened. More heat, more breaking down of the ordering of the molecular entities, more heat, more breaking down, more heat, and melting, and then boom, you've got liquid. A victory in battle, another victory, another victory, another victory, and finally the war is won. Do you think that even though there's like this gradual build-up, then the eventual final change is not rapid and not qualitatively different? So let's make this even more simple. Now, this is going to be scientifically inaccurate in terms, but I'm going to simplify the terminology so much that even a Trotskyist can understand. So keep in mind that this is not really the way you should use these terms, but whatever. So would it be more understandable to you if I said that more heating, more melting, if I, instead of saying more heating, more, like, if I, even though it's not really melting, but just if I said it like it's melting, if I said that once quote-unquote melting has accumulated, even though it's really heat, but let's just say that it's melting so that it's easier to understand. So once melting has accumulated, we have a quantity turning into quality. Enough melting quantity turns into solid going to liquid, qualitative change. So qualitative change is a threshold, and quantitative change is the gradual approach towards the threshold. I hope I've made this clear. And just to avoid this kind of semantic nonsense and playing with words, let's take one more example where the wording is not as confusing. So look at a piece of ice. Then look at water. Are they qualitatively different? Well, yes they are. One is liquid and one is solid, clearly. Are they quantitatively different? Why, yes they are. One has noticeably more heat than the other, because it's, liquid. So a qualitative leap has happened somewhere, has it not? Is there a category between frozen, i.e. solid, and liquid? No. Is there water that is half or perhaps 33% frozen? No. Even when, for example, a glass of water freezes and it sort of kind of solidifies partially while still having some liquid in the glass, it's not half frozen water. It's ice on top of liquid water. Same with melting icicles that have water dripping from them. They're not 90% frozen water, but it's ice with liquid water dripping from it. So this works the exact same with metal. I hope that's clear enough. Just ask questions if you don't. If it is confusing. I know this is it is kind of confusing, but I hope that makes sense to you. Internal contradictions. Dialectical versus mechanical materialism. Among other things, mechanical materialism holds that all things are set in motion by an external push of some sort. In contrast, dialecticians claim that because of their internal contradictions, objects and processes in nature and society are in fact quote-unquote self-moving. Now, this supposed Marxist critique, like they said in the beginning, this supposed Marxist critique is actually just kind of bourgeois slander and mechanical materialism. So, and of course semantics and other nonsense. So, here Lenin is quoted very selectively, and his words are distorted. The language used would require some explanation, which our Trotskyite doesn't do and doesn't give, and tries to fool the reader into thinking that Lenin means something he doesn't. By self-moving, we're not talking about things that just move without reasons infinitely. Although you wouldn't really learn that from our Trotskyites, because they would just let you. That's like they're trying to confuse and fool you. So either our Trotskyite has absolutely no grasp on what dialectical materialism says, or is deliberately distorting it, and I think it's both. In reality, internal contradictions and unity of opposites, etc., being the key in dialectical process, doesn't mean that there are no external forces. I repeat, does not mean that there are no external forces. Like, how could anyone even come to such a conclusion, since it would contradict Marxism? Remember earlier when our Trotskyite was saying that Engels was wrong when he said that only by adding or removing energy, changes occur? So it's really our Trotskyite here who believes that things move and change without causes if they think that stuff just changes without energy being removed or added. So self-motion means that the development is determined by internal attributes of a given thing. That's as simple as I can make it. For example, no matter how much you heat a small stone, it will never hatch into a chick. It will eventually break and melt, but it will not become a chicken, because it's not in its nature, its essence. This is what it means. The internal contradictions determine the change that will happen. That is, an egg becomes a chicken, a stone will crack or melt, but the process is, of course, it's also affected by external forces. It doesn't happen in a vacuum either. Like dialectics is the exact opposite of claiming things exist in a vacuum. So this is from the Great Soviet Encyclopedia. So one would think that finding this information would not be that difficult, because I just made a quick Google search and this is what I came up with. So, in dialectical materialism, the idea of self-motion is based on the premise that internal causes are a source of self-motion. These internal causes are, first of all, the contradictions inherent in all objects with a systemic structure. The influence of external conditions on a specific self-moving system is indirect through internal sources. So the external conditions affect the thing through its internal sources, as you know. So a thing has a specific nature which determines how the external conditions affect it indirectly through its own internal contradictions. So this is how Mao explains it in his work on contradiction. And again, like, this Trotskyite has put so much time and effort into this, it's difficult for me to believe that they really have never heard about this. I think they're just acting, being willfully ignorant here. So as opposed to the metaphysical world outlook, the world outlook of materialist dialectics holds that in order to understand the development of a thing, we should study it internally and in its relations with other things. In other words, the development of things should be seen as their internal and necessary self-movement, while each thing in its movement is interrelated with and interacts on the things around it. The fundamental cause of the development of a thing is not external but internal. It lies in the contradictoriness within the thing. There is internal contradiction in every single thing, hence its motion and development. Now, what this means is, if there's perfect balance, then of course nothing, it can't change. Contradictoriness within a thing is a fundamental cause of its development, while its interrelations and interactions with other things are secondary causes. Do you hear that? Secondary causes? So, thus materialist dialectics effectively combats the theory of external causes or of an external motive force advanced by metaphysical mechanical materialism and vulgar evolutionism. So I think I've made my case here pretty clearly. So the changes that happen are determined by internal contradictions, and they can be considered the primary reason for them. But the external conditions and external motive forces affect the thing indirectly through its internal contradictions. Now actually here at the end it does have a little bit of a disclaimer that when I first made this script I did not see this. So here at the end it actually says that in order to avoid such absurd consequences, some dialecticians, mainly Stalinists and Maoists, have had to allow for the existence of external contradictions or impulses. Now, there's so much wrong with this short quote that I don't even know if I have time to go through all of it, but like they're literally saying that, first of all, they're saying that Lenin completely denies external forces. Now, I don't understand where that is coming from. Like, Lenin talked about this self-motion thing like once or twice in his entire life. He like wrote once or twice about this, and pretty much only in his philosophical notebooks, which were never meant to be published anyway. So he just like wrote a Hegel quote and then wrote some notes about it, and that's it. It's not like he extensively explained what he meant and then said that he denies external forces. Second of all, Lenin used external forces all the time, and everybody did that. Like, look at Engels. He says that, if a grain of barley falls on suitable soil, then if it gets moisture and heat, there's gonna be a change. Like, is that not taking into account external forces? I mean, and what is really going on there? Is it the moisture and heat that's changing the barley? Well, mechanical materialists would say yeah, but of course that's not the case. It's more than anything else, it's the internal contradictions of the barley itself that make it change. You can have any amount of moisture and heat, but it's not gonna do that without the internal contradiction of the barley itself. Then it uses the word external contradictions. I've never heard that before. Never. External contradiction. So it's basically just that it's external forces, but they call it external contradictions so that it would sound more made up, basically. So again, dishonest wordplay here. Then it says that Wood and Grant don't believe in external forces. Then there's a very short quote from Woods and Grant which says that matter is self-moving and self-organizing. Now that doesn't contradict external forces at all, but of course they would have you believe that because they don't tell you what self-motion is. They just expect you to believe something else and then try to fool you. And I haven't even read what this book by Woods and Grant is, so I'm not even gonna take any responsibility for what they say. But I think it's very highly questionable for this Trotskyite to draw such conclusions from this very short quote, which doesn't really say what they claim it does. Then there's a link which says more details can be found here. There are deeper philosophy, blah 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 blah. I went there, looked, didn't find anything that would have had to do with self-motion. Maybe it's there. I couldn't find it. So I love this idea that external forces, they're just something that Stalin and Mao came up with. Like, are you kidding me? Are you serious? Like, everybody else used external forces before them as well. It's not like they just came up with it. What nonsense. So they're literally saying that even though there's plenty of sources that contradict what the Trotskyite is saying, simply because Lenin never really talked about this a lot, we can just basically claim that Lenin said some or meant something crazy because he never really wrote about it in such great detail, so you can just make shit up basically. But there's plenty of more semantics and distortion of Marxist literature to deal with, but I think I've done pretty much enough. Clearly, this Trotskyite either doesn't understand dialectics or simply prefers to lie about it. I think it's a combination of the two. Why they would attack Marxism like this, calling pretty much all the great Marxist theoreticians, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, just fools, according to the site. This person started out as an anti-communist who was very hostile to dialectics and Marxism right off the bat, right from the start. But then as time went on, they moved further to the left until they became a Trotskyite. Right from the start, I was put off Marxism by the philosophical and logical confusion I encountered when reading books and articles on dialectical materialism. My antipathy toward the tradition from which dialectical materialism had emerged was significantly intensified by the training I received in analytic philosophy from a group of first-rate philosophers and logicians at the above university, most of whom were prominent Wittgensteinians and or Phrygians. This ensured that I would never take Hegel or dialectical materialism seriously. So, I guess Trots are just so brilliant that they can see right through all that nonsense that idiots like Marx and Engels wrote. So, to be honest, I've heard plenty of similar stories from other people I know personally who have had the misfortune of dealing with these academic quote-unquote Marxists who think they know everything better than anyone else and that all that old Marxist dogma should just be gotten rid of in favor of their brilliant new theories. So I'm guessing this is even more rampant among Trotskyist parties since they're knowingly revisionist to begin with a lot of the times, at least, especially nowadays. I mean, they don't even accept most of what Trotsky said anymore at this point. But anyway, that was my long thing on this revisionist attack on dialectical materialism. If you have any questions, then feel free to leave them down below, and I will see you next time, and we'll talk about something else, I guess. Bye.